Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Brittan Stockert, who's DonorBox's fundraiser coach. She brings over 15 years of experience working with nonprofits and NGOs of all sizes on fundraising, organizational development, and program design. She is a CFRE certified and deeply committed to causes that support women and children, people experiencing homelessness, and immigrant and refugee communities. At DonorBox, who is our sponsor for this podcast, Brittan works directly with organizations to help them raise money, stress less, and build the strategies, systems, and people power they need to grow sustainably. She's passionate about helping nonprofits, whether brand new or long established, align their mission, teams, and resources so they can do more without burning out. Sound familiar? I have a feeling Brittan and I are about to be best friends. Welcome, Brittan. It's such a pleasure to have you. Before we dive into nonprofit-y things, would you tell me just a little more about yourself personally to round you out as a whole person?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. Well, I've always been on the West Coast from Northern California in what they call the armpit of California, the Central Valley. I'm up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll be honest, I am doing my best navigating being a full-time mom. I have 2 little kids, 2 dogs, full-time job, and just being grateful. The small things. I'm a big outdoor person and in the process of getting diagnosed for ADHD. So thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, you are in good company. I have an ADHD child who also has dyslexia and dysgraphia. So we do all the things through here.
All the
And
things.
in a former life in nonprofits, I was the deputy director of the Global and Regional Asperger's Syndrome Partnership. We don't really use Asperger's anymore. But as a result, I have so many good friends in the autism self-advocacy movement. And I don't know, for me, like maybe people hear other things, but I just want to put it out in the world. Like when I hear someone like is on the spectrum, to me, I'm like, oh, yay. Like it's like a flag of goodness.
So much virtual support your way. To be honest, I'm learning a lot about it, and probably even the way I talk about it is not. So I'm very fresh in the journey, and it's nice to have a friend that gets it. So thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. Well, welcome here. So we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, which feels very fitting for our conversation here and for fundraising. You've been in the sector a long time. What is important about emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think just to start with my personal journey, former working at a lot of direct service, human service agencies, mostly small to medium-sized nonprofits. And looking back, there was kind of a pattern. I was always at nonprofits for probably at the most 6 years, but usually 2 to 3 years. And healthy workplaces, but a lot of trauma that I felt where I was told I was too much, too sensitive, too focused on things that everyone else seemed okay with. And now that I'm in this journey of getting formally diagnosed, I'm really realizing that it wasn't really my inability to read the room. I was just a great pattern seeker, right? And a lot of these patterns that I was naming was very uncomfortable for a lot of my peers. And so in this process of getting diagnosed, I coach about 30 different nonprofits at DonorBox. I'm starting to see the same patterns with the few fundraisers that I'm working with. And what really sets apart a good fundraiser from a standalone fundraiser is really that emotional intelligence piece. If I can, Sarah, if I can share a story, I
Yeah.
one of my clients, he's given me consent. I learned something that put this all into play. Like why we're talking about this right now is we're in the thick of doing a lapsed donor campaign. And what his name is Craig. He runs a civil rights organization in Berkeley. What we discussed as a team of is like, hey, you're going to be doing these coffee conversations. Just having these conversations is the thing. And what any type of fundraiser would do in a lot of these conversations with lapsed donors is they kind of prematurely rush. They kind of check off the boxes. They give the program update. They might ask a question and then that be it. Well, come to find out, Craig told me he was in a coffee chat with a donor. And over the course of time, this donor was like, hey, I am really frustrated. I live in Berkeley, a very hard place, right, for affordable housing. I have this beautifully renovated ADU in my backyard, and it is an eyesore. It's really giving me frustration because it's unused. It's just there's no purpose. And what Craig told me, what he did is he, over a series of coffee conversations, he asked very simple questions like, what's the space originally for? What does it really mean to you? By the fourth meeting, Craig did something that most fundraisers don't do. And he basically brought to life this tension that exists within that donor. And what he said, it's like, hey, this sounds like a space that still means a lot to you. What would it look like if it had purpose again? And you see a normal fundraiser that isn't kind of trained in high emotional IQ, again, would probably hear like, oh, an unused piece of space, I'm so sorry, and then kind of move on. But what Craig did is he kind of kept the thread of this pain point, right, with that donor throughout various coffee conversations. And then he took a risk to kind of bring to surface that tension. And basically, he used it as an opportunity of like, hey, our nonprofit, we would love to bring purpose and meaning to your space again. We host theological seminars. In that moment, what that did for that donor, because Craig has high emotional IQ, is it kind of addressed some deep-seated psychology, that frustration of no purpose or meaning in that space with that donor. So why I'm bringing this up is, for me, that never happened with me. When I would bring up these patterns, right, to my board, to my staff, I was penalized in many ways. But yet Craig was operating in a very different space with a donor where it was celebrated. And it got me thinking about, like, if I have a lot of this trauma for pattern seeking and for the high emotional IQ, what the heck is happening to a lot of our other nonprofit friends who are highly perceptive too, right? Like,
Mm.
is their superpower, is it being misunderstood? Are they also leaving? And this just kind of got me thinking about learning emotional IQ in the nonprofit sector. I'll be frank, like, I am no expert here. I am in the process of getting what's called an international coaching certification, which is trauma informed and also focused on neurodivergence. So I'm still very much in the process. But I think this is going to be what really holds our sector together, is being able to support fundraisers that have this level of high IQ.
Yeah. Would you be able to share, like, what are some of the patterns that you are seeing or that you do see?
Yeah. Well, I can just speak from personal lived experience. I think for most of my life, since we were kids, we were always taught this playbook of nicety, right? Being nice, being warm. And I think those are two very separate things from having high emotional intelligence. My 9-year-old Sarah, she was just recognized at school as one of like 5 third graders for having respect. And yes, like that is nice, right? We want to have the foundation of warmth, of nicety, but the buck stops there. And so what emotional IQ looks like is and I want to say this first, like it's not something that all of us, it's innate, where some people have it and don't. Like it is very much a buildable, learnable skill. But what that looks like is it's not just the ability to spot a pattern, right? To like lean back when you're with a donor, to actively listen, to sit there quietly and to hold space, right? And hold that space internally, which is a whole kind of labor, right? But what really sets apart a high emotional person is what they choose to do with it. So it's not just to name the thing and not to raise awareness, but it's a person with high emotional IQ takes some sort of action. And that action might be bringing it to life, asking hard questions that are not warm and nice, warm and fuzzy, approachable, or palatable. It's asking hard questions at the cost of being palatable. Asking those hard questions, bringing the tension to life. And then also a big part of someone with high emotional IQ, it's about regulating our own emotions, right? So we talk about fundraisers, good fundraisers that have high radical empathy. But where I see this can go wrong is if you don't have high emotional IQ, you're in a donor conversation, you're having coffee. They might have said, hey, I have made this gift in honor of my sister's son that just passed away. If a fundraiser has radical empathy, they can project themselves in it, right? They're not able to address the hard. So they're giving a Kleenex, they're trying to detract the donor to another part of the conversation. That is not high emotional IQ. It's very much sitting there, right, in the moment as a true partner and being okay with that tension. And so that's I hope I'm naming this emotional IQ is so it's not just naming the patterns. It's not just holding the emotional labor, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's choosing if you should respond and when, asking the hard questions to push back, right? And then also learning to not project our own internal coping mechanisms that we have in this. Like we're alongside this partner where they truly feel recognized.
Yeah. I think, with what you're sharing, which I completely agree is so valuable, and it's a skill I'm often working with leaders on. I worked mostly with executive directors and CEOs, and we talk about, you said the phrase read the room, which is something I'm often teaching my leadership team, coach the clients I coach to do. And that is always like, it's a very like advanced emotional intelligence move to read the room. It's not a simple thing. And step one is you have to be able to enter the room with your own emotional intelligence about yourself and not just know how you are doing, but to have processed your own emotions to the point that you are prepared to hold that space for whatever you discover when you read the room. And I've always been kind of naturally leaned this way, partly because my mom is very good at that. And I was just raised, and she's like never diagnosed, but she's definitely on the spectrum. And that's can be a superpower, of folks on the spectrum sometimes is the ability to not react emotionally in certain situations. Certainly doesn't apply to everybody on the spectrum, but I've seen that pattern myself. So there's this superpower there. But then to come in and there's this whole skill set of reading the room. And I have some like activities that I teach my clients to do with their team to help them uncover what's going on. But it is very much an activity where we're listening to what people are saying. We're watching their faces. We're like if we can see their whole bodies, we're aware of their physical movement. We start observing the moment, like people come in the room and then, like you said, take action. If we discover, and is literally having this conversation, go with a client. She was like, I think I have this leadership team meeting and there's this issue that's going on. It might be an elephant in the room. Should I talk about it? And it's like, first, read the room, right? Figure out if it really is. But if it is, you don't just plow over the elephant and pretend it's not there. You have to address what's going on for people. And I saw this really clearly when the pandemic was starting, especially like I led a lot of leadership team meetings because sometimes I'll be in the room with my clients where we just took the time, half the meeting time just to hear what was going on for people. Because if you take that space, if you hold it, if you get through it, there's amazing. I mean, it's good in itself, and there's amazing stuff on the other side.
Right. And it's really holding the space because we're not so used to that silence and pause where, because we're not used to it, we're going to jump to that old playbook that we're talking about, that nicety, the warmth, where we think we're reassuring this donor, right? But we're projecting our own whatever things we need to work out, whether it's conflict aversion or whatever vicarious trauma that we have internally. So we have to what you said, we have to be okay with just sitting in that space before we jump to whatever the next step is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to highlight something else you were saying is that when you're sitting in that space, especially if you're a very an emotionally sensitive person or a highly sensitive person, um, you need to learn that emotional intelligence piece where you hold the space calmly, right? You don't enter the same emotional space that the other person is in. You're just present and witnessing, but you stay in your state
Oh
of,
my
I don't know what,
goodness.
stasis. Yeah.
Yeah, that's spot on. It's very much that emotional regulation piece, which is very much part of the high EQ of not centering ourselves in the conversation. We're very much kind of aligned or alongside the person where we're kind of bearing witness, right? Spot on, Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one I know well in my personal life, as I mentioned, my own kid who's doing so well these days, but when he was younger,
Yeah.
we did, I learned my own limits. Like, this is a learnable skill. Like, you learn to stretch it. Like, I learned to, I could do it in the middle of the day, but my son started having school refusal years ago, and he would wake me up from a dead sleep at like 6 in the morning and not wanting to go to school and so anxious, right? So I had to learn how to have emotional composure with a crying, freaking out kid waking me up at a dead sleep with no coffee in my system yet, right? That was a whole new set of territory. I actually gave up caffeine for quite a while because I was like, I can't wait to get a cup of coffee in my system to be functioning. I can't have any sort of need for caffeine. I've got to biologically, that was a little be ready to go.
Right. I mean, and so much of what you're saying, what we do in our personal lives, how we show up as moms, mom to mom, right? How we manage and work with our kid. I also have a son. It also very much transfers to how we mentor and coach our fundraisers to have these tough conversations and to do that hard thing like showing up to school. So our personal and our professional lives very much mirror each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. I want to dig a little more into something you said about, right? There is a difference between being emotionally sensitive in some way and being emotionally intelligent. And you kind of started to hint at, if you're just emotionally sensitive or very empathetic and you don't have the emotional intelligence, I almost want to call it training, right? Because I feel like intelligence, emotional training,
Yes.
that skill set we can build that you were hinting you are at risk for burnout. You are avoiding the real conversation. Tell me a little more about your thinking there.
Yeah, well, talking about burnout, like let's talk about who's most kind of susceptible. And I love that we shouldn't call it intelligence because, again, it's not innate, right? This is something that we can all build to and learn. But speaking from my own experience, I think people that are highly perceptive, some of us that are neurodivergent, it does come a little bit more natural for us. We are the smoke detectors, right? We physically in our bodies, because we have a rigid code for morality and justice, we cannot ignore these tensions or disconnects. And because we're operating in these spaces where people would rather, if we're smoke detectors, remove the batteries, right, than put out the fire, it causes harm to us. And we're operating in these spaces where, because we're constantly dismissed or gaslit, and none of this is intentional, but there's actual neurobiology, there's neuroscience where if we're continually to operate in these spaces where we're the patterns we're naming are unacknowledged, our frontal cortex, which makes us great emotional regulators, which gives us radical empathy, all the things that give us the high EQ, it shuts down. It shuts down, and then
Yeah.
we can't, all the things that makes us a really good fundraiser, we can't do that thing. And I think when when these things compound, right? When it's just like a bad day or a bad year, because we're operating in these spaces that aren't set up to allow us to do what it is we need to do, there comes a morning where we're like, you know what? My medical health, my complex migraines, my IBS, my heart issues, none of this is worth any of the cost. And so there is burnout. And the people that are most vulnerable are women, women of color, right? Folks with neurodivergence. These are the people. I have a couple of friends of color, and they tell me, they're like, hey, on the outside, the nonprofits, they show us that they really love us, but internally, it's a whole different scene. And so this burnout is happening.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what I wish we would talk about more in our conversations on LinkedIn and on webinars. Like, we're talking about the retention problem, we're talking about burnout, and we're kind of pinpointing it to like, well, it's a compensation, it's a pay and equity issue. Well, no, it's basically it's a problem of we don't know what to do with these folks that have the high emotional intelligence. We don't know what to do with them. And so we're not just seeing like a loss of institutional knowledge, right? Like all the things in your CRM about the donor that you can easily recover, right? We're losing that relational equity. A lot of this stuff that is invisible, that is in someone's head, of the in-between moments, right?
Yeah.
Of when you're meeting with a donor and they're telling you of like, hey, I have to do something with this gift my father gave me. And the reason I'm here meeting with you, Britt, is because I feel guilt. It's that type of relational, colorful insight that sits in the fundraiser's head, and they're sitting with it for a while, that no tool can really document. And so
Yeah.
that's really what the burnout it looks like.
Yeah, that interstitial relationship tissue. That's how I describe it, right? That builds.
Yes.
And when you not just shared, but when you've been present for somebody and made them, which makes them feel safe, and they've been able to share with you one of the more vulnerable emotions like guilt or sadness, crying, right? Like, I think if we just put it in like really simple terms, like anybody who's ever like cried in front of you, you probably
Yes.
have a much deeper emotional connection with them. People
Spot
cry in
on.
front of me like all the time. I'm like, I'm gonna bring on the tears person. I recently did that. I was at an event and all about building relationships, and it's a wonderful group of people. And one thing I had done to deepen some of those relationships is it was my second time going to this event. And the first time I had asked if anyone wanted to share an Airbnb, probably just kind of like out of convenience, and it created some deep friendships. So this time I'd actually, the first time I just asked somebody who I wanted to know better if she wanted to share an Airbnb. And this time I intentionally put the word out, and I got to share with these two wonderful women entrepreneurs. And on the last morning, I got some bad news, and it was such a great space to have bad news. Everybody in this group is like really emotionally intelligent, like all the things there to show up for
Well,
people. And I came upstairs and I said, I just got some bad news. And then, of course, I broke down, not of course, but I broke down into tears. I knew I was in a safe space. And to have not one, but two amazing, emotionally intelligent women there with me, like they held the space, they held me, and then they went into action. Like, what do you need? I was like, breakfast. Oh, I'm angry, right? And then the other one under breakfast, she was like, some breathing can help. I was like, yeah. She's like, we'll sit down together. I'll put on like a breathing thing and we'll do it together, right? All the things. And then all the practical stuff, as I started to, regulate my own, nervous system. It was just amazing to be in a space where it wasn't just me. I didn't have to be a leader in any way in that moment or a mom. And I could just be held and taken care of. It was so powerful.
well, That is really very powerful. And the current concern I have now that I'm working in nonprofit tech, right, is many of us are like, hey, let's just give these nonprofits, these fundraisers more tools. But all of these tools, like think about a CRM, it's going to allow you to capture everything you need about the donation, the gift amount, the donor's capacity to be willing to give and what to give. What you're talking about here, those
Just
emotions when you're
going in a
sitting.
CRM. Yep.
Yeah, and how the heck do you track it? And sure, you can add it as a note, but it doesn't trigger something. So it's like, how do we capture those invisible emotions that we're holding, right, for periods of time too?
And even if you did capture it, it wouldn't do anybody else any good. Right? Like when I cried with those two amazing women and they helped me through the whole process, that's a bond that we have that doesn't translate to a new person, right? Like that has to be built again. The safe space has to be built again. I think we can create some dynamic by having a culture of that, and we can teach people emotional intelligence so that like they're ready to create a safe space when they step into a new relationship. But when a major gifts officer or development director leaves, all of that interstitial relationship tissue leaves with them. It's not
Well,
transferable.
that's a really good point, Sarah. And I see it like relational equity. I know leaders, they always
Yeah.
talk about loss of institutional knowledge. That can be recovered, but the relational equity, like what happens if a donor is like, hey, I know technically when your development director leaves that they've done a great job, that the baton is passed and I can still have a good relationship with the next development director. But let's be real, like trust is gold. And so what is it okay that that relational equity is lost? Or is that something that we need to train on? I'm not sure. I don't have the answer, but it is very much that relational equity piece that is lost when you lose these types of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I want to go back to that burnout piece because I think it's so connected to losing people. And actually, I was listening
Yeah.
to a podcast on marketing, and someone's like getting coached on the podcast. And she's like, I had to leave my old career. And then the coach finally asked, like, what is it? She's like, I did nonprofit fundraising. I was like, oh boy. And she's like, when my leadership team came to me and like they asked me to raise like another $1 million, and she's like, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't raise another $1 million like on top of what I was doing. And I heard that, like I knew that. She didn't have to say, she didn't say anything more. And I was like, I know that. And I think, drawing on my own story as an example, this past week, which I certainly had this experience many times, which is when you do the work, when you don't ignore the elephant in the room, when you go through the emotional journey, it ends in action and it leaves you with more capacity to move forward. It's like you process it through, or if you're the coach or you're the fundraiser, you can turn that emotional tension, that was the word you used earlier, I really like that, into a positive outcome. And then the emotional pieces, the tension is gone and the positive outcome stays. Whereas if you ignore the tension, it's like it stays with you like emotional baggage. And I think it builds up. I think that leads to the burnout. It's not just that we are in these emotional settings. We carry it with us because we don't address it.
Yeah, and I think we do need to go through these processes. I wouldn't call it a grieving process, but we need to go through this process. But with that said, we need to create spaces. I have a social worker friend, and she tells me here in Washington, it is mandated where they have these recurring spaces where their manager will check in like, hey, what are you holding right now? How are you doing? Because even in fundraising work or nonprofit work, there is vicarious trauma, but yet we don't replicate what social workers do, right? In the Pacific Northwest, again, they have those mandated clinical spaces, recurring
Yep.
meetings where the manager is actively checking in on the social worker. We called out a couple of examples of vicarious trauma. You're in a meeting with a donor, they just lost their son, right? Or some very hard things. And so, yes, I do think we need to go through that process of emotional IQ, but we also need to be given safe spaces for vicarious trauma, and we need someone to check in on us, right? Because
Yeah.
the things that we're holding for long periods of time, it is mental and emotional labor. We're moms, right? That's a whole different mental and emotional labor we have. But then in addition, can you imagine adding the professional type of trauma too? So yeah, I would love to see more of us doing this, but I also fear we have to mandate it. We have to like bake it into like there has to be some sort of vicarious trauma informed training for all of us.
Yeah. What would that look like to you in a perfect world?
Oh boy. Well, I'll be frank, like working in corporate now, this is ironically the first space where I'm thriving as someone who's just getting diagnosed as ADHD. I can't really pinpoint. I can name a couple of surface level things that help me. I'm not micromanaged. People give me a heads up at what we're about to talk to. And there aren't any surprise calls or Slack messages. When I speak up about certain things, it's acknowledged. I think in the nonprofit sector, it starts at individual level. I think coaching is a good place to start. We all have our internal frameworks for how we address trauma from our childhood, right? We are either conflict adverse, we come at it hard aggressively, and because we haven't healed those things within ourselves, we bring all of that to work in terms of how we manage people. And so, selfishly as a coach, I would say that's that would be a good place to start is find someone that's a coach, not just maybe just certified, but someone that has been through the ringer, right? They've been through that type of occupational trauma. They've come out of it on the other side. They have that lived gritty experience and they can kind of sit with you to coach you and to train you on building up that skill set. So I believe in the power of coaching. Yes, there are a lot of coaches that snake oil, right? They have a beautifully branded framework out there, but there are real people in your corner that can really help to build up that skill set that really get it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm also a big proponent of coaching, and I think it goes hand in hand for anyone who feels like they have a growth mindset, right? Like,
Heck yeah.
and I also, it's interesting your experience in kind of corporate. So often I am teaching or helping nonprofits install a much more robust organizational leadership system than they are used to. And I think, like, things can get too red tapey in giant corporations, and that is the downside of getting really big and having to keep, hundreds or thousands of people on track. But we can use some of those types of systems that keep people from feeling surprised, that prevent that last minute, always like reactive that happens in so many nonprofits. And the result, most of my clients say, is like one client, the whole leadership team started going, "We're still doing a lot, but I no longer feel anxious when I come into work." Because you're not,
Yes.
when it's more structured, you're not holding the emotion and all the stuff in your brain of like, what do I have to do? Because that question is already answered on paper, right? Look at my calendar, right? Whenever I'm like, what do I have to do for work? I use my own system. The answer is always just look at your calendar and follow along. It's all in there. So I think, that coaching and that systems pair together. And there's one, I know we need to wrap up, but there's one thing you said earlier that I don't want to just let go softly, which is that, women experience this disproportionately, people of color experience this disproportionately, people who are, neurodivergent or diverse or spicy experience this differently. And I really think this is like a collective trauma of being like, not collective, but like collective in each person's own life, right? The number of times somebody of color experiences trauma that is never resolved, it's just a lot more, right? And same for
Yes.
women and same for people who are, have a neurodivergent thing going on. Another episode, I interviewed my good friend, Rebecca, who I stayed with in that Airbnb. She is an ADHD specialist with ADHD. And she said something to me that really changed how I understood all this, which is that, we have that panic response, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which I always thought it was just one of those four things. But what she explained was it's fight, flight, or freeze. And when when those things or one of those things don't work, and especially if it's over time, then we move into fawn. And fawn is the shutdown. Fawn is when those other things hijack our prefrontal cortex. But fawn is like, shut the whole system down. Don't use that
Yes.
prefrontal cortex, like taking energy away from like all your organs. Like you are going into body shutdown. And I think that's that, like, to me, that named that long-term burnout.
And that was kind of my pivotal moment where a couple of years ago, complex migraines, they mimic strokes, IBS, heart issues. I did all the lifestyle changes, yoga, hiking, all that. And until I started to start this diagnosis journey, to be frank, and started to have a coach myself. And then I have a daughter who's 9, and she is the mirror of my mini me. I'm like, holy crap. And so that's the thing about burnout too, Sarah. For some of us, especially neurodivergent folks, there's a term called alexithymia. It's a medical term where we are already in burnout. Our organs are shutting down, our body's shutting down, but we're not even aware that we're burnt out until we're literally broken. And so that's something I'm trying to figure out. And how do I coach on that too? Of how can I encourage other not women of color? And I don't want to tell women of color, but other neurodivergent leaders or other women, how can I encourage them to be very aware, far ahead of it before it's too late? Because
Yeah.
we're losing talented people, right? Our infrastructure is being actively dismantled. And we're pointing to the wrong things, I think. Yes, those things are true. Pay inequity, lack of training or tooling, AI, whatever it is. But I really think it's this emotional IQ piece. Until we can all get trained and to recognize and be aware of it and to be thoughtful about it, then it'll be easier to keep that retention.
Yeah. Wonderful. Brittan, for those folks out there listening who are like, I don't want the conversation to end, I need to hear more, who should be reaching out, and what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. We'll probably drop it in the show notes. I'm also at DonorBox. If you just go to our website, you'll find me there. Yeah, and if you're ever in need of coaching, I do one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and all the things nonprofit related.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brittan, and thank you out there for listening and everything you do to make our communities better. Take a moment to take care of yourself. Check in with yourself. Ask yourself how you are doing. Sit with it for a moment. And if you have an extra minute after that, please take a moment to like and review this podcast. It makes a big difference in helping other organizations and nonprofit leaders like yourself find it. Until next time, I wish you all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.